So the New York Times recently came out with an article titled "Collectors Are Spending Thousands on Video Games They Will Never Play." This is specifically referring to factory sealed video games. And not just factory sealed though, we're talking factory sealed and graded video games. This market has just blown up in the last 1 to 2 years. The article states specifically in the past year. And a lot of collectors have been flipping coveted titles, making a substantial profit. And this is hit the mania phase. So let me rewind a little bit for those who don't know. At least amongst the NES, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, some of the older generation retro video games, for the open copies and the boxed copies, prices have really seemed to plateaued, or they seem to be rising at a much slower pace for the most part. Some of them seem to have plateaued and some of them are still climbing, but very slowly. We're not seeing that crazy run up that we had from like 2009, 2010 to about 2016. I believe the peak was around 2016 for prices when they started to plateau around that point. So I find that the fact that the New York Times is even reporting on this says that this has really gotten out of hand. The article does state that the hottest investments are for games from the Nintendo Entertainment System, so the NES, which is 100% true. I do feel like graded and sealed games will eventually move to other systems like the N64. I'm not so sure about the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo for some reason. I have a feeling, this is just a hunch of mine, I just have a feeling that it's going to skip those generations and go right to the N64 for some reason. The N64 has been really hot the last couple of years. It's one of the fastest growing in terms of pricing, and a lot of the games are still cheap and actually affordable for the average collector or the average casual gamer as well. They can actually afford the games right now. So they interviewed a guy named Donald Brock Jr., who runs the website Columbia Comics, and he said that he spent about $50,000 buying vintage video games since his first purchase in March. So that would have been March of 2019. One sealed NES game cost nearly $1,500. He had it graded and then sold it for more than $12,000. So that shows you the price difference between a graded game and a non-graded game. Now, it doesn't say what the grading was, so if a grading is only an 8.0, is that really worth $12,000? I suspect it was probably in great condition, probably a 9.0, maybe higher, maybe a 9.4 even. It doesn't even say what the game was, but we can assume it was a Mario, a Zelda, a Mega Man 1, something along those lines. Goes on to say, in September, Eric Neyerman, a dentist who had primarily collected sports cars, spearheaded a $1 million purchase of dozens of games. Months after video game collectors jointly bought a rare Super Mario Bros. Games for more than $100,000. The article also says a copy of the original Mega Man recently sold at auction for $75,000. Again, it doesn't say what grade these games were, but we can assume that it was at least a 9.0. Here's a quote from the owner of SideQuest Games in Portland. "You almost can't pay too much because stuff is going up so fast," says Josh Hamblin, who advises comic book collectors seeking to diversify. So even comic book collectors are now jumping into this. These collectors are probably not traditionally the retro video game collectors such as myself. These guys are just jumping in because they see dollar signs. And that's what really drives a mania in the market. When everybody and their mother's jumping in, that's what happened with Bitcoin. Everybody and their mother's jumping in because they just see, oh wow, the price just keeps going up and up and up. And everybody keeps on jumping in. Eventually you get a crash, but we don't know how long that could take. In this case, it might take 50 years. So the article goes on to say some long-time collectors are pleased with the increase in pricing, saying video games are an art form that deserves to be recognized. I fall into this category. I do believe it deserves to be recognized, and I believe a sealed rare Super Mario is equivalent to a Mona Lisa. However, other members of this tight-knit community say that the higher prices are exaggerated, even if their own collections are worth far more now, and some have raised ethical concerns. Market distortion, both legal and illegal, ethical and unethical, is rampant in the art world. said Richard Lujan, founding member of a New York firm that provides legal services for the arts community. So very interesting. In collectibles markets, prices are highest when significance and scarcity overlap. A prime example is Action Comics number 1, the 1938 issue, whose cover features Superman's debut. There are thought to be about 100 surviving copies, and a well-preserved version has fetched $3.2 million at auction. So, could a Super Mario, also rare, one of the original sealed copies, the one that sold for over $100,000, could that eventually fetch $3.2 million? I think it will. Now the article goes on to say, intoxicated by the ascent of value and of rare collectibles, speculators are eager to find the equivalent in video games while prices are still relatively low. That part is both scary and interesting. Will this expand to non-big name, for lack of better wording, games such as your Mega Man 1s, your Marios? Will this go to other games like just a random NASCAR racing for the NES? Like, somebody actually want a sealed graded copy of that? Will that be worth something one day? Is that what the Mania phase is going to lead to? Or is it going to stick to that select few, maybe your Ninja Turtles, your Mario, and your Mega Mans? I really don't think it will expand to what we'll call the trash games, such as your NASCAR or your Wheel of Fortune, something like that. The article goes on to say the surging values have surprised even long-time collectors who for years were primarily interested in completing their collections that included arcane titles such as Color Dinosaur, a game for preschoolers. That is true. That's the whole point of those rare games like Color Dinosaur have value just because of people going for full sets. That's really the only reason why anybody would ever own that game. Nobody's ever going to play it. So Mr. Hamblin, the guy from the Portland retro game store, said he was ecstatic to spend only $1,000 on a sealed copy of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, even though it would have cost just a few $100s 2 years ago. Some speculators visit his store, he said, without properly understanding the industry. They are just coming in and buying anything that is sealed, he said, to the point where I'm saying, don't buy this, it's not even rare. So, the article goes on, it's relatively long. I will link the article below. It does go on to describe the ethical issues with Wata Games basically promoting the sealed graded games and therefore creating more demand for their grading service. So is there some ethical concerns there with Wata, those invested in Wata Games itself, owners, employees, etc., going out and are they artificially inflating this market? Are they doing this to promote their own service and thus create demand? Because the article does end saying Wata Games has been overwhelmed with demand since the groundbreaking Super Mario Bros. Sale, which was that rare copy with the sticker still sealed on it that sold for over $100,000. So now everyone and their mother is getting their sealed games graded. I'm going to end this by saying that I do believe that the only sealed graded games that will retain their high value are going to be the highly sought after games. In other words, nobody is going to go out there looking for a NASCAR for the NES sealed and graded, because I don't think people will ever go after a complete set of sealed and graded games. So the only reason Color Dinosaur has value is because people were going for full sets, and they still do to this day. There are people that are still collecting full sets of games. But no one is ever going to go after a full set of sealed and graded NES games, or any full set of any system. I don't foresee that happening. I'm sorry. And if it does happen, it's going to be one guy that does it. Some billionaire, multi-millionaire, the one guy, maybe two. Like, it's just not going to be a thing. So I do foresee this as a bubble, but only to a certain extent. I think that $100,000 Super Mario game, or a Mario game for the NES, that will sell for $1 million at some point in the future. I do foresee that happening because that is a Mona Lisa. And if I was a multi-millionaire, I would buy it myself because I have an interest in that. I would like to put that on my wall somewhere and look at it. I would like to do that. So what do you guys think? Please leave a comment below, and don't forget to roast me in the comments.